There are probably as many ways to model something as there are people to do the modeling, but I'm going to make a simple box. So I'm going to go to the right side view in this case, and I'm going to start a new sketch on the ZY plane or YZ plane, and I'm going to put a 2-point rectangle out here in space at first. And then I'm going to put a coincident constraint between the midpoint of this line, and actually let's do that as a midpoint constraint between this line and the origin. We see that it moves that line to the origin and that line changes black. I'm going to go ahead and dimension this line, and let's say that I'm going to make this 500 millimeters. Now I don't know whether your intended units are inches or millimeters, but I'm going to make that millimeters. And then I'm going to, now if you wanted to, you could also type in inch units and it will convert that to millimeters for you. Let's say if I put in 5 inches, it's going to convert that to millimeters for me. I want to make that a little bit higher. Let's say I want to make that, let's say 300 millimeters tall. And then I'm going to finish this sketch, and I'm going to extrude this to create a box. And so I extrude that out, and actually I think what I want to do is use symmetry about that origin. So we created that first sketch on this plane, and I want to use symmetry about that origin. So I'm going to do symmetric, and I'm going to go a total distance, and I'm just doing this on the fly, so I'll make up some dimensions as I go. Let's say 1000, and that's a little further than what I want to go. Let's say 750. And okay, let's say that that's what I want. Now that's just a solid block of material, and I don't really want a solid block of material. I want a box with a front side, a back side, a left side, a right side, and I'm going to make this sketch visible again, and I'm going to do extrude again, and I'm going to tell it to go symmetric again. And I'll do mid-plane. Now I said 750 before, and actually let's do it like this. Let's do 750 minus, and let's assume I can't do this heavy math in my head. Let's make sure I have that on minus. I can't do heavy math in my head. Let's say that I want those wall thicknesses to be, let's say 20 millimeters thick. So I'm going to do 20 times 2 because I have 2 walls. And whoops, I didn't get to 2 times 2, and so we see that it's going to cut out all of that material except for my 20 millimeter wall thicknesses on both ends. Notice I have it on cut, or Fusion automatically put it on cut for me. And so I go over here now, and I have 2 bodies, a body for this side and a body for that side. So if I drag the timeline back, so here it was just one body, one big solid body. Now I have 2 solid bodies. Then I'm going to edit that original sketch, and so I'll say edit sketch, and I'm going to, and I could do this several different ways. I'm trying to decide how I want to do it. Let's say I'll just draw a rectangle from here to here, and I'll draw a rectangle, and I'm trying to decide if I want to do this rectangle or if I just want to mirror. Let's just do this one rectangle, and I'll dimension this distance from here to here, and let's make this also that 20 millimeters. And I'll finish sketch, and now the sketch might have become invisible, so I want to make sure that it's visible. And then I'm going to extrude again. I'm going to extrude just this portion, and I'll tell it to go from this object or that face, and for the distance I want to go to this face, and so it goes over to that face, and I don't want to join this because I want to make this out of separate wooden panels, and so I'm going to tell it to do that as a new body. And so we see now I have this front side, and I could either do the same thing back here or I could mirror this. And let's do the mirror. So I'm going to do mirror, and I have a choice of selecting bodies, faces, features. I want to mirror this body, and I want to mirror it about this plane. And so now I have that over on this side. And then let's say I want to cut some slots for some handles in here. So I'm going to edit that sketch again, and I'm going to create a slot, and I'll do a center point slot, and I'll put that slot over here someplace. And I want to make sure that this slot, the center of it, is centered about the origin. So I'm going to do a line from the origin to the center of this slot, and let's drag that over a little bit. So I want to make sure that that line is vertical. So I'll select that, the vertical constraint, I'll select that line, and I don't have to do the next step, but I would like for that to be a construction line. So I'll select this, and I can either come over here and change it to construction, or just hit X on the keyboard. We'll change that to a construction line. And so now that stays centered about the origin. And so I always use the origin to make use of symmetry. So I have symmetry on this side of the origin, this side. I will also have symmetry on this side and this side. So if I have any symmetry in my design, I'll make use of that symmetry about the origin. I'm going to dimension this, and so I'll dimension this distance from here to here, and let's say that is 50 millimeters, and then I'll need to dimension the width of that slot, let's say 150, and then I need to dimension the location. So notice this geometry is blue right now, so I click and drag, I see that it can go vertically up and down. I want to limit that vertical, or locate that vertical height, so I'll dimension to the origin. So I use the origin for my datum for most everything that I do. And so let's say I want that to be 200, and I'll finish my sketch, and then I'm going to do extrude. I'll select that, and I'm going to tell it to go symmetric, and I'll tell it to go all the way through the object. And so it shows me it's going to cut this face and this face, or this body. I'll say OK to that, and so now I have those cut. Now let's say I want to add a panel in the bottom of this. So first I need to do is add a slot for the panel. I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit that sketch. Now I could do all of these as separate sketches, and probably should do at least the next step as a separate sketch so I don't get things too confused. But since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and do this as a sketch here. So I'm going to draw a 2-point rectangle. To center this up, I'll use my trick with the line. Now there are other ways of doing this, but this is a nice visual way. I'll draw a line from the origin to the midpoint of that line, and then I'll put a vertical constraint on this line. And again, I like to change that to construction line. Let's turn off the origin geometry so that it's not obscuring that, and I'll hit X on the keyboard. And at first I'm just going to drag this over here and just visually represent that. Let's say that I want this base, this inlay, let's say that I want it to be let's say 3 millimeters. And then let's say that I want the height of this from here to the bottom, let's say to be 10 millimeters. And maybe I could go, well, I think I'll leave it there. And then I want this distance from here, how far it embeds into that. I want that to be, let's say, 5 millimeters, whatever. All right, so I'll finish my sketch, and then I'm going to extrude this. So I'll do extrude. I'll select this inside this rectangle. Now I selected here, but because I crossed over this line, I also need to select this area, so it might have been a good idea to make this into a separate sketch, but in any case I can get that, and I want to go symmetric, and I'll go full length, and I'm going to drag this down, and I'm trying to decide how far I want to go, and I don't know the distances from here to here, and so maybe I need to go ahead and measure that. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and then check what this distance was. Because this part was mirrored, notice it also cut it over onto this side. But let's inspect this distance. So I'm going to go to the inspection tab, and this distance from here to here in this case is 710. and I've made it 5 millimeters deep on the side. So if I make it 5 millimeters deep on each of these sides, I need to do it 720. Well, I can edit any feature that I've made. So I'll go back here and I'll right click, I'll say edit that feature, and I'll do this distance as 720. Oops, make sure I get my 20 in there. And I'll hide my sketch, and then if I want to make that base in there, actually let's turn that sketch back on again, and I'm going to do extrude again, and I'll select inside this rectangle, and I also need to get inside here, and I'm going to go symmetric, and that's 720. Let's do it a little bit less than 720 to give us a little bit of clearance. Let's say 719, and I'll tell it to do a new body. I don't want to join it to the old body. I want to do a new body, and I'll say OK to that. I could come over here and rename each of my bodies. Let's say I want to name that to front panel. Whoops. Now really these panels, this is just the same panel in a different position. Same way with front and back, but we haven't done anything as far as joinery, how these components are joined together. That would start to get into an additional consideration that we need to make. If I want to turn off the visibility of any body, I can come over here, turn off the visibility. We see how this component goes into those slots, and I might need to allow some clearance to make that slot slightly larger than this panel, the bottom panel, so that it slides in there. Depending on the material you're working with, whether you can force it into that slot, or whether you even want to force it, it might split the wood, or whether you want to add some clearance in that slot. Now we have everything over here as bodies. Think of bodies the same way you think as a sketch geometry. It is for the purpose of I'm trying to decide how I want to describe this. It's not really a real thing yet in what we would consider the real world. What we really need to do is convert these to components. And so, and we could have created those components right from the beginning. And I could select all of them. I've named this one, so I'm going to go ahead and create that component. And so now we see we have this component down here. Now that component can be moved anywhere. I can drag it and I can move it anywhere, just like in the real world. If you're putting this box together, before you put the fasteners in here, you can put that, it can be anywhere. I'm going to undo that because I don't want it to be just anywhere. And in this case, I want that to be grounded, and probably I would start out with this component, make that a component and ground it first. But and then I would ground that, and I could add joints between the other components as I make them, or rigid groups. When we're working with something that doesn't move, this isn't a mechanism that has any motion, we could just leave it as bodies. But if we're going to have any motion, particularly between our components, then we need to convert those to components and then use the assembly joints. So that's a quick start. Just another look at how to get started on modeling something. I recommend that you start your model, create your first sketch, post the sketch so that the experts can examine it and diagnose any issues you might run into, and then step by step go through the design.